Howdy, listeners. I'm really delighted to have my guest, Caleb Chamberlain, on the pod today. So Caleb runs OSHCut, an online sheet metal shop, one of the first of its kind. He started about, I guess, 6 years ago when online metal shops were very rare and I think very wild concept. But again, it paved the way for many other shops and also proved that, this is inevitable future for the industry. So Caleb, it's great to have you on the show.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. So let's start with sort of the basic stuff. So how you actually got into the metalworking industry. So tell us the origin story.
Yeah, well, in a nutshell, it all boiled down to my brother and I needing sheet metal parts and being unable to get them easily from local vendors. My background is actually in electrical engineering. I've done a lot of circuit boards over the course of my career. And in that industry, there's probably 100 companies out there. Actually, that's not true. There's been a lot of consolidation in that space, but there's 100 websites you can go to where you can upload your Gerbers, which is your design files for PCBs, and you can have boards sitting on your desk, in a day. Costs more to get them fast, but you can do it. And sheet metal was just so much not that. So we thought, hey, let's start a company and make that happen. And so that's what we did. That was 6 years ago. We've grown fast. We're not the only company that's doing this either. There's others out there, some that are bigger than us. But it's definitely an idea whose time has come. Need better, less painless ways to have custom parts made. So that's why we exist.
Yeah. I mean, I really resonate with that because when I started my own shop almost 12 years ago, it was the same kind of the issue. I tried to order something. It was like not straightforward way to order anything. I decided, okay, maybe it's the better way to do things. And yeah, then we started that, and of course, because we are, have tech savvy angle to everything. So we decided why not to build the software for ourselves. So that's another question, of course. So it's always a question like build versus buy. So why decided to build instead of buying the online software or online coding software?
We didn't find anything that did the job that we wanted. I think there's a lot more options now. And maybe back then I just wasn't aware of what the options were. Yeah, building is certainly a lot more expensive. You don't just, pay a company to develop some software for you and then you're done. Like software is a continual thing. If you want to build in-house software, you are a software company and you will be a software company forever. We expect to spend, right now we spend, $500,000 to $1 million a year on software development to support our software and add new features and new tools and new services. So I wouldn't change that. Spinning your own software effectively gives you superpowers. You can control the entire experience from first customer contact all the way to delivery, including the manufacturing experience. But you can probably get 80% of the way there using off-the-shelf tools, I would hazard.
Yeah. So how many people involved in only the software side of the business? Developers?
We have 4 full-time developers right now, and we've got a third-party company that we work with as well that we contract on kind of an a la carte basis. It allows us to turn on developers on tap, which helps a lot. That can be a mixed bag. We have a tight relationship with this company, but it works well for us.
Yeah, I think it's important for shops out there to understand that really and truly, as you said, so if you really up for this endeavor to start to develop something on your own, you are no longer just machine shop. So you're a software-driven shop, and the software itself, I mean, you shouldn't treat this only as expense, but also, of course, as your competitive edge. But still, it's a big portion of the business from the maintenance perspective, from the perspective that you need to make sure that you have developers that they are probably growing alongside with the company. So it's a tricky, because again, you're basically combining software and really production, and that's something that now finding a lot of the machine shops trying to do at different scale. So I mean, we obviously talk about in social media we talk about Hadron, for example, as the sort of the extreme example of the company that trying to combine software and of course machining and all of that at a very different scale in a very different capital as well, of course. But it just showing this example of maybe the time has changed for Yeah, things like that.
Yeah, yeah. Hadrian's interesting. I'm not too opinionated about where they're headed, but I will say they're different on backing, but not by scale. We're bootstrapped and we're comparable in scale to Hadrian. So they've been able to operate a little faster than us, but you can do an awful lot with $100 million. So
And that's the beauty of Bootstrap. That's the beauty of Bootstrap. You can be lean and you can still move quite fast and be extremely efficient. So that's beautiful. That's awesome. So talking about like giants or big companies that you're competing with, I would assume, so companies like Xometry, like Protolabs, maybe Hubs and a few others. So how are you winning the customers from them?
well, if you do everything, you're de facto worse, slightly worse at everything, and I believe that's true. So we are hyper focused on sheet metal, and sheet metal workflows are actually just very different from, say, CNC machining. It's actually very, very uncommon to have a sheet metal job or a plate job or a laser cut tube job that doesn't require lots of parts. Like usually you're buying a bunch of parts together. So you get Xometry or Protolabs or some of our direct competitors. They're really structured for single part upload workflows, single part configuration. And that's great unless you need to order 50 parts. And unless it's a job that really requires nesting to generate a competitive bid. And then the workflows are totally different, right? We don't really see ourselves as competitors against Protolabs and Xometry, mainly because they're just not good at sheet metal. And I don't want to poke the bear or anything, but it's a different kind of quoting model, and we're optimized for that model.
So you
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're basically focusing on the not a single part kind of the job, but instead really on bulk production,
Well,
batch.
high mix, low volume at scale is what I like to say. And what that means is we might do a job with 50 unique part numbers, and we've optimized our entire manufacturing experience to make that process work really well, both for the customer and for us.
Gotcha.
But if you have to upload those 50 parts individually, it's a little different. And also, this is a kind of a job that like traditional shops don't want, because quoting an individual part takes forever. But for us, it's totally automated. So if a customer has a high mix job like that, that's our preferred kind of work. And it's definitely what the other shops don't want. They might want, the 2 part numbers and 1,000 of each, right? That's a lot easier to do. But we've automated the overheads is what we've done. And that allows us to capture those jobs and do them well, which is our little niche.
Yeah, it looks like it's the one of the lessons for the shops now that, again, helping actually other shops. I'm talking about like a lot of the shops saying no to specific types of the orders, and that's basically the opportunity for the other shops, especially if you can automate those things and just make sure that you not spend too much time on every single quotation and every single calculation. So that's the winning strategy for basically almost with not zero competition, but basically you're getting this advantage because all of the shops say no to this kind of the job. So yeah,
that's right. And on the flip side, we say no to work that other shops are optimized for, and we say no via price. So when you hit a certain volume of production, it's a pure commodity, and minus having good quality is the table stakes. If you have good quality, what comes next? Well, it's price. So if a customer can't buy from us because they want a lower price, then we're okay saying there's going to be other shops that are optimized for doing that kind of work really well. And that means automation. That means really, very tight focus on all the little details of the margin so that they can get aggressive on price. And that's not the world we want to live in, actually. We'd prefer to have higher margins by virtue of our software automation and our automated front office, but still competitive prices by virtue of the fact that we've automated it. And so when we get into the high volume stuff, we just lose those edges. In fact, we will probably be de facto worse than a shop who only does mass production, right? So that we just don't play there.
Yeah. So I would assume that based on that, you would definitely narrow your focus from the marketing perspective too, just to get in front of those ICP ideal customers that you really other shops say no. Also, we're talking about specific number of the quantities and some other specific things. Of course, like for example, like DXF and DVG files as the hard requirement, like you have to have those files to actually work with us. So what was your learning curve from the marketing perspective? again, to be in front of the right customers?
Yeah, well, it's two pieces. One is that we leverage digital ads and social media and other online outlets to get in front of a lot of the right people. And we do some targeting there. And then after that, our system is very self-serve. We actually will not do a custom manual quote via an emailed RFQ package. We just don't do it. And on the flip side, we don't just limit to, say, a DXF. We actually accept 3D models. So we've tried to, and our system automatically unfolds those and does tooling, collision checks right there on our website so they can see if we can actually make the part. So we've done our best to communicate very clearly with customers about what we can do, and we've tried to widen the rails so that as many customers can use our system as possible. But like, we will never like quote a finished assembly, like a custom table, a custom metal cabinet, anything that requires welding, actual fabrication. Like, it's really hard to get software to auto bid on that and do it accurately. I'm unaware of any company that's been able to figure that out. So again, you just kind of understand what your sandbox is and you play in that.
Exactly. So I would assume that your customer adoption of your online quoting system is basically 100%. So pretty much everyone only have one route to go is through the online quoting system. So no emails, nothing manual, so all through the systems.
That's right.
So, and of course it makes it push you actually to the level, so you need to actually perform well. I mean, on the quoting level. So it's extremely important because that's the only gateway for pretty much all the customers, and that's where the conversion happens. So are you run any metrics on the conversion rate and stuff like that for your system or not yet?
Yeah, we have all that data.
Yeah, I mean that's extremely important. And again, it looks like we still seeing among the shops in the industry that again they trying to compare, okay, how my sales engineers converting those quotes into the jobs versus software converting. And again, it's not exactly apples to apples actually, especially with the time involved in every single interaction with the customer. But again, those metrics extremely important. And again, it looks like we see more and more things like that. Again, so for example, from my perspective, and again, in your shop, it's kind of unique that you basically run everything just through the quoting and no like manual request, nothing like that. It's just all automated way.
That's how we've managed to scale it because we quote right now on average 16,000 part numbers per week, and we have zero quoting staff. So if somebody wants a manual RFQ, it's like, okay, we can't scale that. Like, it's really expensive, and when you get to bids like that, honestly, it can be hard to win the work if you're not competing on price specifically. If we're responding manually to quote requests, we're just like every other shop. Like, what makes us special at that point? I mean, nothing, right? Like, I would like to think that we've got great quality and maybe we're more operationally efficient than your average non-tech enabled shop, because we have a lot of internal software we've written to optimize our production workflows. But okay, let's say we're marginally faster, marginally more reliable. Like, at the end of the day, that might not trump price, and we're not really structured to eat into our margins to win that kind of work. So it just doesn't make sense. Our strength is the software front. So
your philosophy then going to be, so instead of like hiring some additional personnel, additional workers even, you would rather really think as the automation first approach. So like thinking about, okay,
like,
so
why would I hire a bunch of people so I can be like every other shop? We've scaled fast on the back of automation and taking a kind of work that people don't want. All right. The minute we start playing in that other space, like, all of our uniques just go away. And so why would we do that to ourselves? There's no reason to. So we stick to our special sauce, which is an automated experience. It's fast, it's consistent, you know exactly what you need to know, and you'll reliably get your parts as fast as tomorrow. That's what we're all about.
That's awesome. So talking about the sort of the, not even the back office side, but shop floor side, I guess. Did you look into any, let's call it hardware automation, talking about the robots and stuff like that? Because again, so something that I just recently spoke to one of my team members. So they visited the very large sheet metal show. So of course, a lot of the robotic arms now, moving the sheet of the metals and stuff like that. And again, it's It's a it looks like it's slightly easier on the scale of the, I don't know, maybe a couple meters, maybe less than a meter, sort of the sheets. But when it comes larger, that's another huge problem. And again, the other part of that, of course, whether or not you need to actually program those robots, or those robots are can be self-trained or something like that. So did you look into that at all?
Yeah, we've had our eye on it. The challenge is that we do thousands of unique part numbers a week, and 90%, literally 90%, not just vague. Statistically, 90% of the parts that we produce, we will never see again. And we're doing thousands every week. So if you have to take a bunch of back-end time to program robots to handle those parts, it actually gets kind of challenging. So we don't have that kind of robotic automation. Now, we've got a lot of tools that we've designed that automate inventory management, remnant management, so that if we cut a partial sheet, like, we'll do same day turnaround on orders. So if you get on our website and you order a washer, if we only have a 5-foot by 10-foot sheet of plate, we will cut it out of that plate. And now we've got a great big remnant we've got to track. So we've automated software to track that, to keep track of where it is. We've got scheduling automation that automatically nests and combines orders so that when it comes time to produce something, our guy just reviews the pre-existing nest, adds some sheet cuts, and hits go, and it pops up on an operator console out on the floor for the laser operators to run. So we've automated all that stuff. Purchasing as well is automated. But when it comes to making physical parts, it's got to be a person. Now maybe that changes in the next couple decades, but I doubt it for our kind of business.
How many people you have now?
We've got about 60 people.
60 people. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Very interesting. Interesting. So the other part of that, so you said you also automated purchasing as well, purchasing of materials, right? Is it like your own system that basically, allow you to automate, entirely automate the purchasing of this? So basically it looks into your stocks, and based on the orders as well, looking for, okay, so it's a time for reorder. Yep. something. Yeah,
like so we call it the material study. And what it does, in sheet metal, you have to nest in order to actually know how much material you need. So we have a server running on the back end that looks at all the incoming parts, and we pre-prep parts as they're uploaded. In fact, if our system doesn't know how to handle a part, it just doesn't let it be submitted as an order. But it'll do smoothing and some other stuff to fix common problems. But at the end of the day, once it gets in our system, we know we can make it. So our automated system on the back end is continuously re-nesting every single job. Every time something changes, inventory, a part's scrapped, it's rerunning the material study. And the outcome of that is we've got all the existing work in our system nested on inventory that we have. And then if it runs out of inventory, they'll start looking at purchase order line items, and it'll nest on purchase order line items that we're waiting on. And then if it still doesn't have enough, then it nests on what we call a supplier sheet or a vendor sheet, which basically signals, hey, that we've got to buy that, plus whatever's needed to get us up to the min inventory level. We have min max inventory levels, of course. And the outcome of that is on our admin website, our operators can just get on and it shows, here's what you got to buy and from whom. You hit a checkbox, it auto-selects everything, you create a PO, send it off to the vendor. It usually comes next day. So we don't have any purchasing staff either. We just, we have one person who's kind of multimodal that does multiple things, and that's one of them. But
it's awesome.
Yeah.
I really, really like it. That's pretty cool. I mean, again, I'm talking as a software guy, of course, so that's why I'm excited about this stuff.
But yeah, we really geek out about the software here. We do a lot of fun stuff.
Very cool, very cool. So the other question that really I see a lot of that. So we work with a very different shops, like from 3D printing to CNC shops to sheet metal to 2D cutting. So it's a different audience, even though it's like all manufacturers, but actually not. So from the payment methods perspective, so in our statistics, again, we still see the majority, yes, paying with the purchase order invoice, like wires. Then I think it's credit cards, and the bottom is ACH, barely in the single digit, I guess, something like that. Mm-hmm. So you have the same statistics, or what's your statistic on the payment methods that buyers use now?
We're like 95% credit card.
Okay.
We do have the ability, customers can provide bank details so we can do ACH direct debit, but customers don't really like us to initiate an ACH pull from their bank account. I understand that. I don't prefer that either. So for the most part, it's all credit card. Now we are rolling out more standard business purchasing flows with purchase orders and net terms with an automated AP workflow or AR workflow there as well. So our
Till now,
system will send out email reminders. It gives them a payment link, emails the PDF, sends account statements every month. Just the normal stuff. Like if you're using QuickBooks, they've got something for that. If you're using Stripe, they've got something for that. So we've integrated our own system so that when customers log in, they can view all their orders, all their invoices. They can pay it right there. If there's any credits on their account, like a credit note, they can actually select a credit note and apply it to an invoice. So all that's kind of baked in there to make it simple for customers.
very cool. So you were able to, till now, scale to really tens of the millions with only credit cards orders.
Yeah,
mostly.
isn't that wild?
So
we
that's
definitely have
wild.
customers begging for terms, and we just, up until recently, we've just said no.
I mean that's magic of saying no to. I mean, it's both magic in the machining space, and it's also magic in the software space, as we know. Saying no to a lot of the nice to have features of stuff like that.
Yeah. We like to say that engineers love us and purchasing departments hate us.
Yeah.
And it's pretty true because engineers love us because they can upload their 3D model, get an instant price, watch it bend on our tools, right on the website. And they'll actually, when I say we bid on 16,000 parts a week, what's very common is we have engineers upload a part, they see what it does on our tools, they go and redesign it a little bit, they try it again. So there's this iteration. But in the end, like they love it because they can do that, they can iterate. By the time they submit an order, they know we can do it. And they know what the lead time is going to be, right? So it's a good experience for the engineer. But then meanwhile, purchasing's like, what do you mean? What do you mean I can't send you a PO? Are you out of your mind? And that's fair. We're working on it.
Interesting. Does it mean that you have, or your buyers have some sort of the cap or the limit? Well, basically kind of the limit of the credit cards, like 10K up to 10K, I guess. That kind of orders, right? So that's the limitation.
And what we find is we have actually quite a few customers who will literally submit an order on a credit card, and then they email us and say, don't charge it. We're going to send a wire or an ACH. And then we'll put it on hold and wait for it. We collect the prepayment, and then we take it from there. But that entire workflow, as of this quarter, is about to change. We're rolling out the new systems right now.
It's very cool. Yeah, very cool. Okay. So talking about that, again, from my point of view, we are sort of entering the era where it's really necessary to be this kind of vertically integrated shop with basically in-house everything. Well, I mean, most of the things like production software, materials, purchasing and stuff like that. And especially in the US, and maybe a few other, of course, countries, that's the only way to build high margin, successful and just growing business. I mean, in the machining space. You think it's true? Or it's still a space for legacy companies that going to be hanging then for the while, just because again they have customer base, of course, loyal customers and things like that. So what's your view on that? What will happen in the next 10 years?
I've thought at length about this. I have a lot of opinions, actually. But first, I want to start off by saying there's an awful lot of ways to make money as a manufacturer. And one of the ways that manufacturers scale and improve their margin is I actually just commented on a thread on LinkedIn about this. But one of the ways is to integrate vertically. And that either means pushing down in the value chain and absorbing all the margin that's available and all the value-added services that are required on a part or an assembly before it gets to the final customer. So if you own that margin, hey, that's great. Even if your margins are slim, you at least have more margin dollars, and that's great. Another one is to scale, which allows you to push vertically upward in the supply chain. And that means, so if you look at the slices vertically and how metal is manufactured, as you've got mills who are massive and operate at scale, who sell to a really small number of service centers, typically. They're not even selling, like mills don't sell to like GM, to your automotive manufacturers. You would think at that scale they would, but they don't. They sell to a service center. Service center buys that metal, they level the coil. If it's sheet or plate, they warehouse it, they deliver it. And service centers are scaled horizontally across hundreds of industries. And they provide that very generic service, right? Service centers sell to companies like mine, like OSHCut, and most other manufacturers. And that's true if you're buying bar stock. It's true if you're buying tube or sheet metal or plate. That's where you're getting your metal, from a service center. And then from there, there's one to many players that add additional services that change the metal before it gets to the final end consumer. All right, so you want to scale a company, you want to grow, you want better margin. All right, you offer services downstream, which means you're targeting usually one or two industries very effectively. Because it's not just the operations you're performing on the metal, it's also how you sell. Like the way you sell in automotive is different from medical, is different from aerospace, different from, there's so many industries, and in each one there's a different, there's a bunch of sub industries too. All right, so you learn how to serve a industry particularly well, and usually you scale by grabbing a high volume job, and that's how you grow. But there's going to be a lot of margin pressure there. You're competing with China, right? What I think is going to happen, or what I think should happen, is if you look at a service center, they're desperate for margin because they're operating at really slim, 2% range net margins. And you see that because they're buying up shops and trying to push into that space, but you can only do so much of that, right? You can't be good at 20 industries, depending on how far you push downstream. But what's happening and what's being enabled by software, and my company is an example of that. The companies that you sell to are examples of that. If you have software that allows you to add additional value-added services, in our case, blanking and bending, for example, hardware insertion, powder coating, we can do that horizontally scaled just like a service center, because anybody can upload a part and say, I want these operations performed, and then we just ship it, right? I think what needs to happen, and what's likely to happen eventually, is a service center figures out how to do what we do, what OSHCut does. And now all of a sudden, 30 to 40 points of gross margin are eliminated in the entire value chain. Because the service center figures it out. They're desperate for that extra margin. They aggregate that work further downstream across all these industries, either through acquisition or by developing it in-house. And now every other service center has to do the same thing to be competitive. And then within a decade or two, the landscape has changed so that it's almost not even worth buying a laser anymore, because you buy your blanks from the service center. And they'll do one for you, or they'll do a million for you. And service centers will land ultimately at 2% margin, just like they are today. Maybe they get a decade or two of really great margins, and that's great. But the end state is that everything gets cheaper. And I think that should happen. Whether it happens or not, who knows? But it's going to be technology that enables it. Because the way we do business is so different from a warehouser, which is what the service centers kind of are. Mm-hmm. But tech is what allows us to do that. And it just bolt that onto a service center, and now all of a sudden you've got margin pricing power direct to mill. And you're taking that scale and you're applying it to the huge set of high mix, low volume jobs scaled across the entire United States. Yeah. Well, we'll see if that's where it goes, but that's what I think is going to happen.
Yeah. I think I even can recall a couple talks with exactly the companies that basically sell steel to other, that they have some intention to do so, to move to this direction. It's interesting. So it's, their intention is very clear. They just have no choice. They have no other direction to move to. So then what do you think about what would be the place for the marketplaces? Is it still a place for them in the future? And
that's that is the right question, actually. I appreciate that you asked it, because there's a huge venture-backed push for these marketplace things. And in fact, the direct manufacturers that are scaled across lots of operations like Protolabs, they're investing. Protolabs went out and bought 3D hubs, right? Because they want to be a broker. I don't know why. To be a direct manufacturer, you want to be a broker too. That makes no sense to me. But the takeaway is, if you have a model, if you've got a business model that relies on parts that are well defined enough that you can upload a 3D model and get an instant price, that is precisely what a service center will be able to do at prices that nobody can compete with. So I think that broker models, marketplace models, even OSHCut models are going to die out as soon as service centers figure it out. And it's an open question whether they'll figure it out. But I think if they do, it's going to change everything.
It's interesting perspective. Again, I think one of the positive sides of the VC funding that we're getting in the manufacturing space is yes. So I mean, it's definitely as always push some innovation, and some of the things, most of the things will die. I mean, as always, some of the things will grow to something, but mostly something that we see, I guess, it just all those money will be used to sort of accelerate everything for everyone, not only for the companies that got this funding.
Now it's cheaper to make stuff, right, and easier.
Yeah. And
that's a good
also,
thing for everybody.
Yeah, and also like I think we're facing a future where again, like smaller companies can definitely win. I mean, by small I mean just you don't need to have like thousands of the people, even hundreds of the people probably to run the company to run the very large company. That's something that not only AI again is a buzzword, but also like efficiencies and the productivity stuff that allow you to do, like just basically run big company with less people. So that's what happening.
Yeah. Well, yeah. In addition, I apologize to keep interrupting.
Sure, go ahead.
Because what's going to happen, I think, is that service centers will push downward, but it'll create opportunity for shops out there to do the vertical specialization, but way easier because now you don't have to buy $1 million laser to get blanks cost effectively. You can get prototypes from the service center for cheaper than you can anywhere today, because service centers are direct to mill. So all of a sudden, like, it'll create this opportunity for thousands of new businesses that can serve particular industries, particular niches extremely well without huge capex. So I think there's going to be a shuffle. Like, people are either going to shift to vertical specialization and they'll go out of business. But the vertical specialization is interesting too, and it's a great opportunity for technology because there's a huge world of products that are hard to get customized. And you can build software that allows you to do all the configuration, and then that plugs into the manufacturer's shop floor, basically. There's a company called Not a Wheelchair, which is kind of a funny name, but they're a wheelchair manufacturer. And you can get online, you can customize a wheelchair, and then they'll make it for you for a fraction of the cost, like 25% of the normal cost. And they're doing that because they're this vertically integrated, where they figured out a way to build software to solve a particular need really, really well. So yeah, I don't see consolidation and vertical expansion as a bad thing. I think it's just going to change where the opportunities are for businesses.
Yeah, I really like you touched this point on the customization, because now we need to think about customization broadly. One of the and again, it looks like to me that almost the first industry that sort of allowed those customization was PCB. Basically, PCB was the very, very first guys who actually figured that out and make it possible to do it online. And now, of course, we do everything with machining and others. And so you mentioned wheelchairs. I also thinking about things like workout equipment, for example, lifting equipment, stuff like that. It's mainly sheet metal. I mean, mainly. It's highly configurable, especially because a lot of the people, of course, building their own garage, home gym, stuff like that. So it's extremely cool. You can fit any spaces, compact space, like limited space, whatever. And it's nice combination of the machining and final product, which of course can add the value on top of that and improve your margin. So, I mean, it's beautiful. I think it's beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. And it can be hard to scale that beyond a certain point, but that's okay.
Yeah, I mean,
there's this talk, circling back to Hadrian, there's this kind of idea that they're going to be able to aggregate a bunch of volume, and they look at this fragmented landscape of tens of thousands of shops and say, well, why hasn't it consolidated? Well, it's because you can't really build a moat. You can be a really, really good manufacturer, but you're constrained by capacity just like everybody else is. And if you push too hard to grow too fast, like CapEx is real, depreciation's real. I mean, look at Proto Labs. All right, their return on assets, if you look at their financials, is like 3%. 3%. Okay, they're not even beating inflation. So they're reinvesting all this money into equipment, and it's just like vaporizing value. And their big selling point was, well, we have infinite capacity. Okay, well, there's your cost. Infinite capacity has a cost, right? So if you look at Hadrian, it's like, well, what are you going to do? Well, we're going to stamp these manufacturing operations all over the U.S. It's like, okay, well, you have to ride this razor edge where you either have too much equipment or you have too little. If you have too little, then the garage shop down the street can outbid you because they can deliver twice as fast, because capacity is a real constraint. And then if you scale too far on the opposite side, you have too much equipment, your overheads are too high, you have to charge a lot, and the garage shops is going to beat you again because they can charge less, right? And meanwhile, the $500,000 5-axis machining center, even $1 million, is imminently accessible. That's an easy loan. So the barriers for entry are low. Customers have tons of ability to move around and bid anywhere at zero cost to them. So customers have a lot of power. And then you've got this knife edge constraint on capacity. The only way that you aggregate is by creating some kind of a moat. And the way that's going to happen is downward pressure, downward consolidation at the service center level, or on the flip side, somebody scales up fast enough they displace service centers, like go straight to mill with buying. But that's way harder than a service center bolting on a horizontally scaled service. Sorry, I love this subject. So.
Sure. No. That's perfect. That's cool. So then, what's your sort of the vision of the next gen shop? How it's look like from the automation software perspective? Again, we touch on Hadrian and a few others. So how it should look like to be this, this in the middle sort of the spot where you're not too large, not too small. You can beat other guys. So what do you think about the next gen shop?
Well, I think the newest, the best shop, I think it's going to become normal for shops to own their own software stack. And actually, we talk about AI as this buzzword. I think that hype aside, AI is going to make it really easy to do custom software. I mean, we use it, and it's a nice tool. It's just going to get better. GitHub just released. GitHub's this versioning repository. You know what it is, but your listeners may or may not. But they've just released a tool that lets you conversationally build an app, right? And even, I haven't used it. I wanted to tinker with it, but like those tools are going to get better and better until the point where, shops are just talking to an AI and building custom software to meet their needs on the fly. I think that's going to be the new reality. And that'll be really interesting to see where that puts us. But really, from my perspective, the end goal is you want to reduce friction. You want to make it easier to make stuff. And whatever tools are in the tool bag, in a particular industry, so whatever tools are in a tool bag that can make that happen, I think that is the future. That's where your margin is. That's where your success is making that customer experience as good as possible.
So is it a long-term game for OSHCut, or you have even bigger vision? Maybe become a service for the steel, for the metal?
In some ways, we just follow our nose. Our customers ask for stuff, and we do it for them. And we identify the pain points and we make it better. We do have a lot of long-term plans for how we can improve manufacturing generally, but there's no magical formula in there. One of my biggest fears is that one of our competitors will scale fast enough to command direct to mill pricing before we can. How do you compete with somebody whose material costs are 60% of yours, right? On the flip side, mills don't want to sell to little one-off shops, right? Mills have buying relationships with just a handful of people, and they're not structured to do like consumer sales, like far from it. So that kind of scale is hard to hit. I think the most likely competitive pressure is going to come from the top down. And so we've got our eyes on that. But
yeah, are you seeing any on the landscape, any changes of the volume of the jobs that basically growing? Because again, we're seeing a lot of the reshoring and things like that happening. So did you see any spikes in that, or maybe overall you see it's really growing? It's not like kind of fictional. So yeah, we do a deceptive number of large jobs actually for companies you've heard of, but they're literally buying with a credit card usually. And we're talking like $60,000 on a credit card. Yeah.
There's a handful of companies that are okay with that and they buy from us. But ordinarily, like these big customers, they use us for really rapid development and turnaround, lots of parts, manufacturing jigs, that kind of stuff. But they have different partners for mass production because the requirements are different. Speed is no longer the main factor. It's we need an AS9100 shop who's, ITAR registered and can provide really detailed first article inspections that can quote to a print, all that stuff. We don't actually do all that yet, at least. So the big jobs go with more traditional manufacturers.
But it's also like, it looks like it's sort of the next frontier for you as well, to make it possible, order, to place an order, even if you have a sort of a big job, right? So you will it's basically inevitably will happen. So you will take on those larger jobs, and you will, I'm pretty sure you will figure out the way how to automate that and make it like efficient and more.
Yeah, if we're requiring 400 new business customers a month, which is about where we sit, some percentage of that are going to want high volume production, and if we can set up an actual automated line for higher volume, maybe with like a robotic bending cell or something, then we could have a conversation and say, hey, we did your prototype work, you loved it. At a certain volume, we'll throw an engineer at the setup and tooling and everything else, and we'll get that automated. We'll run it lights out for much, much cheaper. And we'll do it while preserving some healthy margin too. So there's some opportunity there too. We'll see about the timing.
Yeah, yeah. But again, I think future is definitely bright, especially for the shops like OSHCut. Again, I'm a big fan, of course, because you're combining my two passions, which is software, and and metalworking. So that's beautiful in a beautiful way. And again, as I say it, pave the way for others. I mean, for other shops and also for software companies like Digifabster as well. So keep it coming. It's amazing what you're doing, and yeah, wish you just the best.
Appreciate it. Thanks for the conversation.
Thank you so much, Cal. Thank you so much. Right. Okay, and